Chapter 17 is a great chapter on food safety, and I encourage you to read it thoroughly. This is important information for you and your family. We're thinking more about where our food comes from, and for good reason. Does our hamburger come from cows dancing through a meadow? More likely it comes from cows living in crowded, unsanitary conditions in a feedlot. And this matters on many different levels, but with regards to food safety issues, it does make a difference. We see that animals that are crowded and walking around in each other's feces are more likely to become sick, and to keep them healthy need to be given antibiotics, and that can create antibiotic resistant microorganisms. So our food system is large and complicated, and there are many points where contamination can occur. So we have to be vigilant at as far as making sure those points of contamination are monitored and that our food is kept safe, because food poisoning can be deadly. So take a good read through this chapter. I'm not going to go into all the details here, but it does look at things like pesticides, reducing these agrochemicals, what organic foods have to offer, and generally they offer lower residue counts, but they come at a higher price. If you visit this website, you'll see something called the Clean 15 and the Dirty Dozen, and it is a little bit of an aid for deciding which produce is most important to buy in organic form and which is less important. Antibiotics and hormones are a consideration, different life stages with risks to that developing fetus and young children as well. So we become more concerned about things like high mercury fishes at certain stages of life. Packaging, processing, preservation, all of these things impact the food that we're eating, what we're ingesting, and in many cases our health as well, our risk for things like cancer. In children, they're seeing some links with developmental disorders as well, neurological type problems. Depends on the specific additive. More information can be found at the Environmental Working Group as you click in. We're going to spend most of our time talking about food safety in terms of how you handle food at home. Fight back comes from the USDA and the FDA. Watch the video bite for sure. And we're going to talk about these 3 simple rules: keeping hot foods hot, cold foods cold, and your hands, utensils, and the kitchen clean. Many of you have taken microbiology, and you understand that microorganisms grow rapidly in the danger zone from 40 to 140 degrees, which is room temperature. And that's why we have the rule that perishable foods should not be kept at room temperature for more than 2 hours. Refrigerator slows the growth but doesn't stop it. So things also have a life of safety in the refrigerator that does not last forever. And in the freezer, you stop the growth, but once you begin to thaw that product, you'll see the growth of those microorganisms. This is why there are recommended ways to thaw things like meat products, and there are those that are advised against. Recommended are in cold water, of course in the refrigerator, or in the microwave if you cook immediately afterwards. Not recommended is on a counter, because what happens, part of that meat thaws and the bacterial growth begins as the rest of it continues to thaw. The upper end of this thermometer is very important as well. We need to be concerned with cooking foods to the right temperature and holding cooked foods at the right temperature. That temperature is at least 140 degrees for holding cooked foods. So a couple of those important points are circled on this slide: no more than 2 hours at room temperature, hold foods at 140 degrees, make sure you cook things to the recommended temperature internally, and you must check it with a thermometer, a meat thermometer. Ground meats are a special hazard because when you have a cut of meat, it is not sterile on the surface. So there will be bacteria, microorganisms on the surface. When you grind it, those microorganisms move all the way through. So having a ground beef patty, a hamburger that is cooked still very pink in the middle, is definitely a risk as far as food safety. Keep foods chilled. So if you're serving chicken salad, you need to make sure you keep it on ice, or abide by the same, no longer than 2 hours out at room temperature for sure. And when you're packing up lunches, keep them cold. A few of the key points are circled again. And I mentioned that things don't last forever in the refrigerator. There's a wide variance here, but be sure to check. Things like leftovers, couple of days. Things like lunch meat, and I always have to hunt down the lunch meat, couple of days, okay, when you're getting it from the deli. You also want to make sure things are clean, and we're getting very good at doing this, but you certainly want to wash down your surfaces. You want to separate as you prepare your meal, so don't use the same cutting board for one product and then another. You want to clean sponges and towels, etc. And once a week you want to bleach everything down. Give it a really good sanitizing. This is very, very important. Cross-contamination is a word you should understand. Cross-contamination means that you contaminate one food from another. You perhaps use the same knife that you cut the chicken to cut the celery, and that of course is something that you do not want to do. Okay, so read over the tips. There's also a little bit of an added section here because it's related in terms of some of the tips about how to preserve nutrients in foods. Be sure to read this over as well. And some links to farmers markets information can be found on this page, as well as a TED Talk. Okay, so we are finished the Chapter 17 lecture. Be sure to read the chapter thoroughly before you begin answering your questions. You're taking your quiz.